So as you would have seen, Module B means you've got to know them intimately and all the ideas. And that brings me to the last one, Module C, representation and text. Remember I opened with saying that this is the bookend of your papers for the HSC? In area of study discovery, you actually looked at representation, how meaning is conveyed by composers. And you're now going to end with that with Module C. Representation and text, that's the lens that you're going to study your text through. This is not like Module B. This is not a close study of text. This is looking through the lens of representation. Please remember that when you write the essay. Too often when I was supervisor of HSC marking of Module C, I actually saw students talking only about the text or the poet or the novel rather than talking about how the composer represented meaning and why. So what is representation? Let's go back to it. And remember, this runs through the entire English syllabus from kindergarten. It is the act, the constructedness of a text, deliberate choices made by a composer. Why did they, for example, construct a character this way? Why did they use this language? Why did they use this form? You're asking those questions. You're going to look at the medium or media of production, as it's been called in the new rubric for the prescriptions. So the medium or media of production, what are all the parts that come together to make up the form? So if you think of making a cake, it's all those ingredients that make up the cake. What language, filmic, visual, oral techniques are used in this text and why? And the reasons for these choices, the purpose and perspective of the composer. So you need to do some research. And this includes not just for the prescribed, but also for your related texts. And please, you need to. At least two. I know for the past number of years you've been asked for one only or at least one. Please have two in case one doesn't fit, or they could ask for two. And you've got to look at the meaning conveyed and the ideas. So what are the key terms in the rubric? We just said earlier, the medium or media of production. How is the text made? Is it filmed, written, drawn? What are the key parts? The textual form, is it a poem, a novel, short film, etc., and why this choice by the composer? Whose perspective? Like, what's the composer? How's he or she see the world and why? And what choice of language is made to convey the message? So we have two electives in Module C. The first one is called Representing People and Politics. So it looks at the ways in which texts represent individual shared or competing political perspectives, ideas, events, or situations. Now, if we look at that carefully, political perspectives, ideas, events, or situations, you can actually do it through any one of those lenses. So in other words, the questions could ask any of those. Secondly, you're looking at representations of people's political motivations and actions. So straight away come back a bit, why did they, for example, in The Crucible, what motivated the characters to do what they did? And how were they set up by the composer to act the way they did? As well as the impact political acts have on individual lives or society more broadly. So in terms of an essay, what motivated them politically, what were the consequences? The second elective is called Representing People and Landscapes. So very, very different, but it's still about relationships, one with politics, one with landscape. This is the ways in which texts represent the relationship between the lives of individuals or groups and real, remembered or imagined landscapes. So for example, it could be travelling to a place like Barcelona. It could be how you engage with the landscape, the Australian outback, or it could be surfing at the beach and how you felt about it if you're Tim Winton in Breath. You analyse representation of people's experience of particular landscapes and their significance for the individual. So if you think about an essay again, what is their experience, their relationship and why, and what are the consequences? So both essays really are about what led to this moment in the text and what are the consequences. The Marking Centre, and having been in charge of this Marking Centre for 4 years for Module C, stronger responses demonstrate a perceptive understanding of how composers use different ways to construct meaning. So they actually considered a variety. That's why I try to make your related texts a different form. You don't have to, but I think it's a really good idea because then you can contrast the way that form and structure and medium production work. You have to have a cohesive, focused and incisive thesis that immediately goes into the question. You've got to analyse and evaluate the textual evidence in terms of the act of representation. And this means you explore the medium production, the text form, the features and how they work together. So the response again. This goes right back to how we've started every one of the modules. A conceptual thesis grounded in representation. So what does this mean in terms of the question? It means you actually can prepare some really good thesis statements because you know it has to be about the act of representation. But then you're going to have sub-theses or ideas linked to the question. You're going to integrate your evaluation of the prescribed text and a text of own choosing. You must refer to medium production, form and structure, and you must consider how the composer's purpose and perspective have shaped the act of representation. And you're going to balance this out with textual analysis. Again, this is not a litany of shopping techniques of language. This is just going to be ideas with evidence because you're looking at how the ideas are represented. So I'm going to use the art of travel, which is from people and landscapes, that relationship as an example. So what's the form and media of production? Well, this is a multimodal text. It's referred to as a pastiche. It deliberately blends visuals such as famous romantic paintings and poetry, philosophical musings, personal anecdotes that actually convey his idea about the notion of travel through landscapes. It's critical and self-reflexive. He actually comments on his own act of travel through landscapes. It's a dialectic between word and image. In other words, dia, across, talk, the word and images talk to each other. So when he travels through the beautiful England countryside, and he actually talks about the sublime and the beauty of nature, he'll use poetry by Wordsworth and paintings by romantic painters. He weaves together episodic narrative tales of travel of his own philosophical discourse, because he's a philosopher, and reflections on the art of travel. The paintings mediate a cultural perspective of landscape, and the stories are like a counterpoint to each chapter's focus. He talks about the art of travel as being a skill in conducting travel, acknowledging your mindset, opening your eyes and senses, being curious, accepting and embracing and being inspired. Now remember I said act of representation, why? What's his purpose? Well, he actually says what I wanted to do was uncover certain feelings that we have in certain places. Now de Botton was a philosopher and he's a humanist, so he's actually drawn to our humanity's response to the landscape. And he's looking at the epistemological search for understanding. He actually says things like, what I wanted to do was to cover certain feelings that we have in certain places, the psychology of places. You know, it's really fascinating to actually look at our relationship with the landscape in terms of our own psychology, our attitude and our perspectives. So these are just some of the key ideas that come out of that relationship with the landscape. And the first one, if I wanted to really talk about the first one, it probably drives all the others. It's called mindset. If you think about a growth mindset, it's someone who's flexible and open to change and open to receptive to the world around them. But a fixed mindset is you carry your baggage with you, and I don't just mean your bags. You actually carry with you all of those preconceived cultural perspectives, for example, and your prejudices. So travel is a mindset requiring receptivity and the ability to see anew. So de Botton says the pleasure we derive from journeys is perhaps dependent more on the mindset with which we travel than on the destination we travel to. So this is your overarching idea for the whole text. The response to a landscape reveals as much about the beholder as it does about the landscape itself. So he actually said, I had inadvertently brought myself to the island. Then of course, it's not just mindset, it's our senses. It's how we feel and see and smell and all those things when we respond to landscapes. Then he also looked about how artists and writers can fuel our imagination and determine how we respond to a landscape. He talked about the sublime power of the landscape over us, but he also talks about complacency and familiarity in a landscape can result in myopia and even contempt. So for example, if you've ever been in a place and you've just taken for granted that you live, for example, near beautiful Nobby's Beach or somewhere like Blacksmiths, you surf it all the time, but you don't truly see how beautiful it is because you're there all the time. De Botton says, we have become habituated and therefore blind. This brings me to the texts of your own choosing. They are the discriminator, just as they are in the area of study for discovery. Remember, most students in the state are going to be doing one of these texts, prescribed. So you need to choose a text, two of them please, that stand out. So they should allow you to strengthen your argument in response to your prescribed text. They could be a subtle comparison or even a stark contrast. They should be substantive texts. Don't choose a song, for example, unless you do music and you're able to talk about the oral features as well as the language. If you choose a film, be able to talk about the language of film. It's not just language features. And make sure that you find them engaging, otherwise you won't remember them anyway. So I'm going to give you an example again of one of my students' essays, and what he used was Gwen Harwood's beautiful poem At Mornington. One of the things I want to say in Module C, it's the last module you do usually in a school, depending on how you do the order you do your texts in. And therefore in the HSC too, in terms of writing, it tends to be the one that you rush on in the exam. So be kind in terms of these related texts. Choose ones that really allow you to remember them and to show off in your essay. So let's have a look at what this student has written. Let's see if he does the act of representation. Texts as a deliberate construct are used as a vehicle to represent and explore composers' internal subjectivities. Let's have a look how he started. Text as a deliberate construct. What do we say, Mod C? The act of representation. Used as a vehicle to represent and explore the composer's internal subjectivities. Internal subjectivities, his own bias, his own perspective. The ability of landscapes to surpass the boundaries of the finite world is represented through the intricate relationship between people and landscape. Now you're looking at his second thesis statement. Sub-thesis is linked to the actual elective people and landscapes. De Botton's philosophical pastiche Art of Travel and Gwen Harwood's lyrical poem At Mornington explore this notion through the romantic perspective. Through a manipulation of form and language, the composers elucidate the sublime as fundamental and integral to the human condition. So again, active representation, he's using manipulation. Whilst the Art of Travel's pastiche uses philosophical questioning and documentation of the landscape to argue its cyclical nature and the importance of natural landscape and mindset, At Mornington uses poetic verse to exemplify the emotionality and nostalgia of past and present landscape and its ability to reverse and trigger memory to construe greater meaning. Notice, look, he's comparing them, but now he's moved beyond to show how they're different. The didactic message is analogous. The nature of romantic landscapes being transcendent and sublime, now he brings them together, is the resolution to linear interpretation and representation of landscape as a mindset. As such, the composers utilise their text and its didactic nature to evoke a paradigmatic shift in the individual in their act of representation. He comes back in at the end to the notion of the act of representation.